The Al-Shabaab terrorist group claims credit for deadly suicide car bomb attacks in Somalia. At least 6 people were killed. Kenyans ride on a Chinese-built railway with billions of dollars in debt aboard. And how a mobile app is helping Maasai cattle herders find rich pastures and water in drought-stricken regions. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. We begin tonight with a deadly bombing attack in Somalia. At least 6 people were killed on Sunday in a suicide attack in Mogadishu after a car bomb was detonated. The terrorist group Al-Shabaab's taking credit for the blast. VOA's Arash Arabasadi reports.
Smoke fills the air after a terror attack in Somalia's capital city, Mogadishu. At least 6 people died when a suicide car bomb struck a local government office Sunday. The explosion destroyed the office as well as a nearby school for religious studies. Most of the school's children were away from the building at the time of the blast.
We were in the middle of our usual work when the explosion happened in front of our district office where our building was destroyed.
The extremist group Al-Shabaab claimed responsibility for the attack, which blew off the roof of a mosque and damaged nearby houses.
I hid myself under the table. There was a lot of gunfire at our gate. Someone called me to check if we were safe, but when I came out, I saw many people laying on the ground injured, while others were dead.
In addition to the suicide bomber, soldiers and civilians died in the blast. Police say another dozen people sustained injuries, and the director of the ambulance service said at least 14 were hurt, 6 of them children. The attack comes a little more than a year after U.S. airstrikes killed one of the militant group's leaders. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News.
Well, the number of migrants arriving in Europe is falling, but the rate of death has risen sharply, especially for those crossing the Mediterranean Sea. This according to a report released Monday by the United Nations Refugee Agency. The report, titled Desperate Journey, says that nearly 2,300 people, or 1 death for every 42 arrivals, died last year trying to cross the Mediterranean. Even with Libya's crackdown, people fleeing a host of indignities in their home countries are desperate to get to Libya so that they can try to get to Europe. Vincent Cochetel, UNHCR's special envoy for the Central Mediterranean, says the smugglers are taking greater risks with their human cargo.
The reason the traffic is become more deadly is that the traffickers are taking more risk because there is more surveillance exercised by the Libyan coast guards. And they're trying to cut the cost. It has cost them more to keep those people longer in their warehouse under captivity. And there are more difficulties to get the supply, maybe the dinghies, some of the boats. So that explains the higher rate of death.
Journey says that the key drivers of forced migration remain unchanged. Now, Vincent Cochetel.
In Africa, we still have conflict in the Middle East that are pushing people on the road of exile, and say some people, in spite of the information campaign and more awareness through social media about the risk they may face along the journey, people still make that decision to try to cross the Mediterranean.
Well, this year, with almost 1,100 deaths, the rate is 1 out of every 18 arrivals. In June alone, the rate was 1 death for every 7 arrivals. 10 times this year, Desperate Journey says there have been incidents where 50 or more people have died, most of them after departing from Libya. 7 of the tragic incidents happened in June. At the ongoing China-Africa summit, Chinese President Xi Jinping told African political and business leaders Monday that China's investments on the continent are made with an eye on improving Africa's development and not mere vanity projects. Xi's remarks at opening the Triennial Forum on China-Africa Cooperation in Beijing were aimed at assuring the African representatives about his Belt and Road Initiative to lend billions of dollars to Asian and African countries to fund massive infrastructure projects. China's investment in Africa comes with no political strings attached. Xi told the group China does not interfere in Africa's internal affairs and does not impose its own will on Africa.
When I came here, I was really amazed. I can't understand these good people. I can say submissive people, people that love government, and people that really adhere to the law of the government. You don't find a lot of complaints on the streets. People do what they want, what they feel is good instead of complaining. I think the African people can learn this from the Chinese.
Well, China has made inroads in Africa in recent years, striking numerous trade and infrastructure deals with several nations. Xi pledged $60 billion in loans and assistance for Africa at the last China-Africa Forum in 2015. Now, critics of Xi's plan say the massive debt will leave these countries beholden to China. Well, Kenya's biggest public works project since colonial times is a $5 billion test of the Belt and Road Initiative's pledge to be a win-win for China and its African partners. Viewers in the Miyake Makaliele narrates part one of our three-part series.
It is the biggest public works project ever in Kenya, a $3.8 billion bet on the country's economic future. Sealed on a deal with China to help build a sprawling rail network in East Africa. They call it the Madaraka Express, after Kenyan Independence Day. And in its first year of operation, it has given Kenyans new freedom and optimism. The train, more widely called the SGR, for Standard Gauge Railway, is a critical link in something far bigger. China's massive Belt and Road Initiative, a $1 trillion plan to finance and build railroads, ports, roads, and other huge projects in nearly 70 countries.
So these infrastructure projects are not altruistic aid projects. What the Chinese get out of it, or what Chinese companies get out of it, are lucrative infrastructure contracts where not only Chinese construction firms win these contracts, but they also pull along a number of smaller suppliers and other Chinese companies that also get to participate.
Belt and Road projects are certifying China's ascent to the top trade partner for African states.
Everything is negotiated in China. The money is paid in China, like the SGR money is supposed to have been paid in China. What is brought to Kenya is the debt.
To build the railway's first leg, Kenya borrowed almost all the $3.8 billion cost from the Chinese. Same for the next section, now under construction, another $1.5 billion. The debt makes China far and away Kenya's biggest lender. Repayment was forgiven for 5 years, but in 2019, loan obligations to the Chinese will rise more than fivefold. Critics fear the debt will make the SGR a long-term loser, a victim to China's debt trap diplomacy.
The magnitude of that debt, the ability to repay, the magnitude of those loans in comparison to the gross domestic product, all does matter. And I don't think that level of analysis has been conducted for these projects. And therefore, I say we need to worry.
Kenya Railway and government officials declined VOA's interview requests. So did the SGR's builder, China Road and Bridge Corporation, and the Chinese embassy. Across Africa, the needs are great. The Africa Development Bank said countries face an annual infrastructure funding gap of some $70 to $108 billion. China has pledged $60 billion in financing for Belt and Road projects in Africa.
So there's some justified skepticism on the part of the World Bank and other international financiers on the economic viability of some of these new railways. Estimates for the economic viability of the Kenyan railway really depends on whether or not the targets for freight can be met. This, in a large part, will depend on how well the Chinese and Kenyans can cooperate in localizing skills and knowledge to operate and maintain this railway in order to make it sustainable.
It's too early to say whether the Madaraka Express will be an engine of progress for all Kenyans. But there's no doubt it's already a win for the Chinese.
Well, in part 2 of our China-Africa series, conservationists protest that Chinese contractors rushed the Kenyan Railway project into Nairobi National Park, home to hundreds of species without adequate environmental studies. You won't want to miss it. So be sure to watch Africa 54 on Tuesday. Well, South Africa's mainly white Solidarity Union says its members will go on strike at the country's petrochemical firm, Sasol. They're unhappy over a share ownership scheme that's being offered exclusively to black staff. In a statement, the union says its members plan to switch off a different section of Sasol each day and that it's planning 3 weeks of industrial action. Sasol is a global leader in technology conversion of coal and gas to fuel. Solidarity says it will file a complaint to U.S. regulators over what it calls Sasol's discriminative black share scheme. Meanwhile, the ruling African National Congress says Solidarity has every right to strike, but expressed concern over what it calls the racial overtones of the strike. Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. Still ahead on Africa 54, Kenya pastoralists go high-tech. But first, a look at Monday's headlines.
Chinese president tells African political and business leaders in Beijing that his country will provide an additional $60 billion worth of financing to Africa. In Somalia, at least 6 people were killed when a suicide car bomb struck a local government office in central Mogadishu on Sunday. In Rwanda, voters went to the polls Monday in parliamentary elections. And the UN Refugee Agency says that 1 in 18 migrants crossing the Mediterranean Sea in an effort to reach Europe from Africa has died in the attempt since the start of the year. Finally, at a high-level conference organized by Germany, Nigeria, Norway, and the United Nations, Berlin promises its full support to the Lake Chad region.
Well, a new mobile phone app using satellite images is helping Maasai cattle herders in Kenya find rich pastures and water in their drought-stricken terrain. The device also tells them places to avoid to reduce encounters with wild animals. VOA's Faith Lapidus has the details.
In Kenya's Bubisa village, Ali Gufu and his companions lead a herd of camels from a watering site to a grazing camp. The 42-year-old father of 3 inherited nomadic pastoralism from his forefathers, but he cares for his animals with a 21st century tool, a smartphone app called AfriScout.
Initially, we used to travel a lot by ourselves looking for pasture, but from February this year, we have started knowing AfriScout, whereby some of our guys know how it is used, and that information is helping us. We can now get pasture without much struggle. Now we are coming from the water point, and we are going home early because we know where the better pasture is.
AfriScout was designed by Project Concern International, a U.S.-based nonprofit organization. It estimates Africa's 225 million pastoralists are on average losing a quarter of their herds each year. The app helps direct them toward rich pasture and water and away from carnivorous animals and other sources of danger.
We are able to know where to find better pasture, where to find water, and where there are no diseases.
Competition for grazing land sometimes led to fatal inter-community clashes. But since the herdsmen started using the app 6 months ago, there's been a dramatic reduction in violence and a surge of positive collaboration. They've set up grazing committees that have drawn up a year-long grazing plan. In one Maasai village, the elders used the app to subdivide their pasture land into permanent settlement sections and an open community grazing field. By encouraging planned grazing patterns, PCI official Brenda Wandera says the system also helps reduce the impacts of climate change.
So through the AfriScout application, pastoralists are able to see how the rangelands are looking like, and in that way they can only move their livestock to places where the forage has rejuvenated enough and avoid the areas that have been degraded. And by avoiding the areas that have been degraded, they give these spaces a time to rejuvenate. And as the land is rejuvenating, then through the information they have received from AfriScout, they are able to manage the rangelands properly, and in that way contribute to the reduction of the effects of climate change.
PCI has also introduced the app in Ethiopia and Tanzania and says that initial results have been positive. I'm Faith Lapidus, VOA News.
In the United States, the 5-day mourning period for the late Senator John McCain ended Sunday when he was buried at his alma mater, the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, near Washington. McCain's final resting place is next to his longtime friend and Academy classmate, Admiral Chuck Larson, who died in 2014. Saturday, in Washington's National Cathedral, former Democratic President Barack Obama denounced the current state of U.S. politics as mean and petty at a private memorial service for the war hero.
That spirit we celebrate this week, that striving to be better, to do better, to be worthy of the great inheritance that our founders bestowed. So much of our politics, our public life, our public discourse can seem small and mean and petty. Trafficking in bombast and insult and phony controversies and manufactured outrage. It's a politics that pretends to be brave and tough, but in fact is born of fear. John called on us to be bigger than that. He called on us to be better than that.
Eulogizing his fellow Republican, former President George W. Bush praised McCain's courage, which frightened his captors and inspired his countrymen. It was honesty, no matter whom it offended. Presidents were not spared, he said. Bush, too, rejected the status quo of Washington politics, which he said is contrary to McCain's personal beliefs.
He was honorable, always recognizing that his opponents were still patriots and human beings. He loved freedom with the passion of a man who knew its absence. He respected the dignity inherent in every life, a dignity that does not stop at borders and cannot be erased by dictators. Perhaps above all, John detested the abuse of power.
Well, in addition to Obama and Bush, others who delivered tributes and greetings Saturday included Senator Lindsey Graham, former Senator Joseph Lieberman, former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, who advised then President Richard Nixon on Vietnam, and McCain family members. McCain's pallbearers included actor Warren Beatty, former Vice President Joe Biden, former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, and Russian dissident Vladimir Kara-Murza. While family, loved ones, celebrities, and prominent political leaders, including former U.S. President Bill Clinton, among the thousands who gathered in Detroit Friday for an all-day funeral ceremony to honor singer Aretha Franklin. The star-studded event, with musical performances by Stevie Wonder, Jennifer Hudson, and Faith Hill, among others, was at times somber and often joyful, a larger-than-life tribute to the woman known and loved around the world as a Queen of Soul. VOA's Cindy Sain has more.
It was a ceremony fit for a queen, likely just the way that the singer known as the Queen of Soul planned it. Though not shown to TV cameras, she was wearing a full-length sparkling gold gown with sequin gold shoes for her final outfit inside her shining casket. Civil rights activist Al Sharpton said he believes the iconic soul singer, who lost her life to pancreatic cancer 2 weeks ago, is now in heaven.
Now it's time to crown the queen. Ain't no cancer over there, Aretha. Hand in your cross and pick up your crown.
Pastor E.L. Branch said Aretha Franklin's impact spread far beyond her hometown of Detroit, but she never forgot her roots.
Who touched so many lives the world over, from popes and presidents, even to the least and the last, whose music captivated our minds and hearts with rapturous rhythm and life-giving lyrics, who started with us and stayed with us and stuck with us through thick and thin, good times and bad.
Really gonna miss you.
Franklin's oldest childhood friend, singer Smokey Robinson, paid tribute in song.
I'll miss you, my friend.
A number of speakers highlighted Franklin's support for civil rights, women's rights, and for all kinds of people who did not have as much success in their lives as she had.
She was that rare queen who never lost the common touch. She could drop her fur coat on the stage of the Kennedy Center in front of those with great power and great wealth and continue to care about the plight of poor, unfairly treated people in forgotten parts of this country.
She lived with courage, not without fear, but overcoming her fears. She lived with faith, not without failure, but overcoming her failures. She lived with power, not without weakness, but overcoming her weaknesses.
Former Attorney General Eric Holder and former President Bill Clinton confessed they were big fans, or groupies, as Clinton said, like so many fans, celebrating Aretha Franklin's life as a queen who earned her crown. Cindy Sain, VOA News, Washington.
But in today's polarized political climate, when divisions and mistrust toward people of other races, beliefs, and sexual orientation have become a rallying cry, how do we teach young people to become more tolerant? That's a topic the No Place for Hate initiative is trying to tackle. The program has been implemented in hundreds of U.S. schools. Educators say the idea is to start early with small acts of kindness. Here's VOA's Helena Georgievich.
College Gardens Elementary is the kind of school where children are exposed to diversity at a young age, where students interact with children whose families come from more than 40 different countries.
College Gardens is an amazing school, and we have some fantastic kids, but not one person in this school is perfect. And so for us to continue to learn and grow and accept one another is something that we continually work and strive towards.
If you ever find yourself stuck in the middle of the sea.
No Place for Hate starts with student-led committees. Guided by teachers and parents, the committees think of ways to promote kindness, from paying a compliment, opening a door for someone, to making sure no one eats lunch alone.
I wanted to help kids around the world that are being bullied because no one should feel like they're not enough.
The Anti-Defamation League started the initiative in 1999 after the shooting massacre at Columbine High School in Colorado. Today, the program is active at more than 1,700 U.S. schools.
Here in the Washington, D.C. area, we launched No Place for Hate in 2016 as a response to the growing sort of climate in our schools of really divisive rhetoric from political campaigns and throughout our country seeping into the halls of our schools.
Some students have found inspiration in young activists such as Hannah Mangat. At 12, she co-founded the Sikh Kid to Kid youth organization, after 6 worshippers at a Sikh temple were shot by a white supremacist in Wisconsin.
We pick up things from our environment, regardless of whether it's explicitly said to us or not. And I think that right now we're not being taught enough that hate is not okay.
We have
The initiative is also seen as a way to prevent the loneliness and anxiety that can contribute to mental health problems and potentially to tragedies such as school shootings.
We all want to connect with someone, and so a part of this work is, despite how we may look in terms of our differences or what our beliefs may be, then there's typically always a point that you can connect.
So what can young kids do to protect a friend who is being bullied?
I'll tell them to please stop. We're all the same, even though we're a different race.
It's a message the program is trying to drive home, one young student at a time.
Did you guys have fun?
Yeah! Helena Georgievich, VOA News, Washington.
Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. Now, this group of clowns is spending the afternoon with children at a hospital in Johannesburg, South Africa. The clowns visited various hospitals in the city as part of training in medical clowning, a skill that promotes use of laughter as part of therapy for patients. The students all have a background in theater arts and have been attending a 10-day workshop by Dr. Amnon Raviv, the first person to ever earn a doctorate in medical clowning in the world. Raviv works as a clown doctor in Israel and was in South Africa in August to help a newly launched NGO, Dr. Heartbeat, set up its medical clowning training program. That's cool. Now, next up, meet Kika, the robot. It can follow honors around the home and play videos using its projector. Until now, it could only play audio from its small inbuilt speaker, but using technology from French Bluetooth company Tempo, it can now connect to multiple Bluetooth speakers in the home. That means owners can summon the robot either with their smartphone or by voice command and tell it to project a video while playing the audio on nearby Bluetooth speakers. The robot already available for $1,800 euros, or about $2,100, equipped with both Google Assistant and Amazon's Alexa digital assistants. The technology also enables the robot, or perhaps a television, to play separate audio tracks on different speakers or different Bluetooth headsets. Well, and finally, have you ever wanted to get a cooking recipe up on a screen in the kitchen but didn't want to use the tablet with your sticky fingers? Then Bosch might have a solution for you. The PAI system uses a projector and a motion sensor to create a screen on the kitchen worktop. You can scroll and swipe as much as you want, even after getting your hands in bread dough. But it's not just kitchens getting smarter. A new addition to the system is a smart doorbell that shows a live video from the front door when someone rings it. But you may want to wait to upgrade. Experts suggest waiting to see who wins, Alexa or Apple. And that's what's trending today. And that's our show. Good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. So, you know what happy is, and medium comes between small and large.
To find a happy medium.
So, is this idiom about feeling kind of happy?
How is it going with your neighbor? Is he still complaining about your playing the trombone at night?
He was, but it's fine now.
How did you guys work it out?